Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, dear friends, dear guests and members of the Valdai Club. I'm pleased to welcome you at this closing session of the 18th annual meeting of the International Valdai Discussion Club. And of course, it gives me great pleasure to invite our most distinguished guest to this stage, President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Good evening, Mr. President. We're very glad to have you once again and to see you in person, because last year, due to the consequences all too well known to you, we had a very good conversation, but remotely right now, life is getting back on track. This year, our session has been very interesting, very energetic and vibrant. I think people miss live discussions about relevant issues of today, and we didn't expect that. But, you know, of course, we understand that international politics is very important to discuss, but this is not the most important thing right now. Yes, it's changing, but the pandemic has not overturned it. But the same does not go for how people live, how relationships are built between people, states, and societies. And there have been some fundamental shifts here, and it's been like a thread going through all our discussion. And I think we'll have a chance to talk about that, but for now, I would like to give the floor to you to address the audience. Distinguished participants of the plenary session, ladies, gentlemen, from the outset, I would like to thank you for coming to Russia and for taking part in the events organized by the Valdai Club. As is tradition, during these meetings, you raise acute, burning issues of today. And you discuss comprehensively issues that are relevant to people across all countries of the world. This year, the forum's main theme has been formulated very straightforward, bluntly even: global shake-up, 2021, the individual values and the state. Indeed, we live in the time of fundamental shifts, and as is tradition, if you'll permit me, I will speak and share my views on the agenda that you have formulated. These words live during the times of change. It seems somewhat trivial because we cite it so often, but this era goes back quite some time, and this state of fluidity has become something customary. So do we need to emphasize that or not? And I think that I agree with those who've come up with this agenda for this year's forum. I think it's worth doing that. Over the recent decades, many people have quoted the Chinese proverb: the Chinese people is very wise, they have great thinkers and great valuable thoughts we have to keep in mind. And one of them is, God forbid that we should live in the time of change. And we live during these times of change, whether we want that or not. And these changes are becoming increasingly fundamental, increasingly tectonic. And let's cite another thing coming to us from China, another piece of wisdom. The word crisis in Chinese, I think there are many people from China here, and if I'm wrong, they will correct me, but as far as I understand, crisis in Chinese consists of two hieroglyphics. The one stands for danger and the other for opportunity. And we say in Russia, you've got to be clever about fighting the difficulties, and when you fight the danger, you've got to use your experience. And we have to realize the danger that we are up against, and we have to oppose it. And there are different dangers, and they are multifaceted. And there is another component to the crisis, namely opportunities, opportunities that are not to be missed, that have to be seized. Especially because this crisis we are up against is of a conceptual nature, of civilizational nature. It is a crisis of approaches, of principles that underlie the very existence of humanity on Earth. And one way or another, we will have to have a very serious think about all of that. And we need to understand what we have to renounce, what we have to revisit, what we have to adjust. And I'm confident that genuine values have to be fought for, and we've got to defend them with everything we've got. Humanity has entered into a new era, and it happened more than 3 decades ago when the main conditions were in place to put an end to the military, political, and ideological confrontation. I think you've talked about that, and our foreign minister spoke about these themes too, but some things I will have to reiterate. Back then, a quest was started for a new balance, a new equilibrium, new conditions in social, political, economic, cultural, and military fields. There was a search for a foundation for a new world system. So far, we failed to grasp it. And those who felt that they were victors after the Cold War, and we said that on many occasions, and they felt after climbing the Olympus that they were losing the feet, the ground under their feet. And however beautiful the moment was, even you say, linger on, the art so fair, you cannot make it stop and linger. And this changeability is ever present, this transit is never ceasing, and it seems we should have adapted to it, but so far we failed to do that. And this transformation that we see is of a different magnitude than the ones humanity faced in the past. It's not just a shift in the balance of power or scientific and technological breakthrough, even though these things are happening right now. What we encounter right now is systemic changes that go in parallel in all directions, in all dimensions. The geological, the geophysical state of our planet is changing, and we have increasingly paradoxical interpretations of humanity is and what its raison d'etre is. Let's have a look around. Let me share some thoughts with you, thoughts that I cherish. First, the deformation, the degradation of climate and the environment are so evident that even the most careless people and laymen cannot simply dismiss them. We could have scientific discussions about the mechanisms behind these processes, but we see that these processes are deteriorating and something has to be done about it. Natural catastrophes such as droughts, floods, hurricanes, and tsunami have become all but a norm. Suffice it to remember the tragic, devastating floods in Europe this summer, or the wildfires in Siberia, but elsewhere too. We saw the wildfires in Turkey, in the US, and in the American continent. Any geopolitical, any scientific, technological, and ideological competition becomes almost senseless amid such conditions if the victor of such a competition will have nothing to breathe or nothing to sate their thirst. The coronavirus pandemic has become yet another reminder of how fragile our community is, how vulnerable it is. The main objective is to ensure safety and security of man and its stress resilience. In order to have greater chances of surviving the catastrophes, we need to revisit how we organize our life, our housing, how cities have to develop, what the objectives or the priorities of economic development are for whole countries. And security is one of the imperatives, one of the peremptory norms. And I dare anyone try to contest that. And then they will have to explain why they turned out to be not ready for crises and shake-ups. Secondly, social and economic problems humanity is facing have exacerbated to an extent that right now we see terrible consequences. And right now everyone says that the current capitalism model, which underlies social structure in the overwhelming majority of countries, has run its course, and there is no escaping the entanglement of controversies within the current model. Even in the richest countries and regions, we see a growing inequality of material benefits and also inequality of opportunities within societies and at the international level too. I spoke about this most important challenge when I spoke at the Davos Forum earlier this year. And of course, all of these issues are fraught with deep social rifts. And a number of countries and a number of regions, people are facing a crisis of food. We'll probably get back to that, but there are grounds to believe that this crisis is only going to exacerbate, and it can take extreme forms. There is also the lack of potable water and electricity, and I think we'll get back to that as well, let alone such issues as poverty, high level of unemployment, as well as lack of proper health care. And countries that are lagging behind realize these issues very acutely. They despair of having a chance to catch up to the leaders. And this frustration is fueling aggression, pushing them into the ranks of extremists, and people who live in these countries feel frustration because their expectations have been disappointed. They feel that they have no prospects, not themselves, not just themselves, but also their children. And this leads to a quest for a better life, for uncontrolled migration, which in turn creates conditions for social discontent in countries and better off countries. I don't need to explain anything to you because you understand that and you probably know all of that better than I do. And also there are other acute social issues, challenges and risks in better off countries, in leading countries. And right now, this fight for influence is being relegated to the background because you've got to address your own problems first. And sometimes we see this blunt, aggressive reaction of society, especially young people, against the measures aimed at coronavirus. And we see that the infection has become but a trigger, whereas the roots of social discontent run far deeper. The pandemic of coronavirus was supposed to consolidate people in the fight against this great threat of the utmost magnitude, but instead it became a divisive factor. There are many reasons to explain that, but the most important issue is that people tend to traditional models which do not work, or to be more precise, they work, but very often they produce the obverse effect. Sometimes they lead to a worsening of the situation instead of improving it. On many occasions, Russia has come up with a call to put aside the ambitions there is no place for in this world and to work together. I believe
which carries a 5-year sentence. And this law in the United States has some consequences and sanctions are imposed. For example, your accreditation is revoked, your accreditation to the Congress is revoked, and you cannot go anywhere, either to this meeting or that meeting, nowhere. Yes, and people are nodding. They know that very well. You actually work like underground there, and we will continue to work like that in the future. Mr. Putin, thank you very much for your healthy conservatism. I am a mother of 3 children. I'm afraid of the situation when my child will be able to choose a gender, sex, and she will be told that she is a human being who will feed her children with human milk, and I hope that it won't be allowed in our country, despite it being very open. You have said about blah blah. That became a humanistic foundation of the European ideas. So the freedom of speech was like that postcard, and we try to look at that. We hope that there won't be any foreign agents in our country, but actually this freedom of speech strangled our YouTube channel and our freedom of speech there on the internet. And you know that it is not our project. In the first place, it was the project that we tried to make for the country, and we do not believe in anything other than reciprocal measures. And Deutsche Welle was behind us in some ratings, and still it covers events in Russia, but we cannot cover events in Germany, although we have studios there. We have been working with the audiences, but suddenly, without any trial, in a second, without any grounds, our initiative was thwarted. So we ask you, Mr. Putin, to protect us, and we can see no other way than reciprocal measures. And there is another question. There was a Congress of Compatriots taking place in Moscow, and I asked colleagues who were there. Those were the people who protect the Russian language in other countries of the world, who are ready to sacrifice themselves for that very high purpose. So there were some people who wanted to get the Russian citizenship, but they could not. There were many people like that, and we spoke about the possibility for the Donbas people to get Russian citizenship. Cannot we make it easier? Well, the Greeks, the Germans were not afraid, weren't ashamed of that, of providing citizenship to the people who wanted that. So, okay, as for the reciprocal measures, I believe that we should be more careful, and if someone makes mistakes like that, and I believe that this is a mistake when we talk about closing down the channel or creating conditions when it's impossible to work. I know that bank accounts were closed. Actually, many tools have been used. That's like a blanket bombardment. Yes, I know they did everything to prevent you from working there. I know that they infringe on the freedom of speech. It is bad, but the fact that they are doing this makes you think that since you are banned to work there, it will raise interest to you. Well, yes, there is that interest, but people have no opportunities to watch our channel, YouTube channel. Yes, I understand. As for the reciprocal measures, I do not think they should not be counterproductive. As for the Russian citizenship, well, yes, you're right, and my position is as follows. We need to improve this tool. There are social and economic factors, including hospitals, kindergartens, jobs that we should think of. Houses for those people, well, but still, we should have a more liberal legislation on citizenship, and this is what our labor market requires as well, so we'll think about that. Thank you. Colleagues, apart from those people who are present here in the room, there are participants who are watching us online. They didn't manage to come, so I ask Robert Legwald, the honorary professor of the Columbia University, has joined us. Could you please show him?
Thank you very much, Julia. For me, it's a disappointment that I've not been able to be with all of the participants in the Valdai conference, but I'm particularly pleased to have this opportunity to be part of this session. The topic of Valdai this year has been very transcendent and fundamental questions, and I admire Valdai for doing that. And Mr. President, President Putin has certainly risen to the challenge of that agenda and has addressed it in an extremely engaging and revealing fashion. My question, however, is narrower, much more specific, and I apologize for descending to this level, but it's a question that's important in my country. I think it's a question that's important in your question. Although neither your government nor the Biden administration believes that a reset of the U.S.-Russian relationship is possible at this juncture, how do you evaluate or how do you assess the evolution of the U.S.-Russia relationship since your meeting with President Biden in June? In what areas has there been progress, if any, and what, in your view, are the obstacles to further progress? Thank you very much.
So I have already answered the questions like that. I can only repeat myself. However, there are some things that I can say right now about the developments. The Geneva summit was productive by and large. And it seemed to us, when I say us, I mean my colleagues, so it seemed to us that the American administration is interested in rebuilding their relations, so at least in some areas. So what did we agree upon? We agreed to relaunch the consultation on strategic stability, and they started indeed. They are ongoing. And there should be also consultations on cybersecurity, and they have started at the expert level as well. So we should say that the number of questions and issues that we have agreed upon is not that big, but still we have managed to agree upon something, and it's a big progress. And the American administration and Russia have been implementing the plans and have been moving forward. And as we know, it is always a message, a systemic signal. Look, our trade turnover increased by 23% in many areas. It is an indirect influence of our meeting in Geneva. So by and large, we have taken the right route, the right path, and I'm not going to speak about some unfortunate things. We have always said that we are making a one step forward and two steps back, but by and large, on some most important areas, we have making a headway. So it's like that. Thank you. So since we are living in a new world, we have the world of digital technologies. We have a colleague from Beijing, Mr. Chou Bo.
Mr. President, it's really my great honor to ask you this question. First of all, let me thank you for this opportunity. I will ask you something about Afghanistan. Afghanistan lies in the heart of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So if Afghanistan has a problem, then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has a problem. Now the United States has withdrawn from Afghanistan. So how can Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is led by China and Russia, united with other countries to help Afghanistan to achieve political stability and economic development? Thank you.
Well, you know, it's one of the most pressing issues nowadays. The situation in Afghanistan is very acute, and we have had a meeting with the representatives of the Taliban movement and the People's Republic of China has been working on Afghan issues as well, quite actively, and for us all, it is a very important issue because Russia and China believe that it is very crucial to have a calm and developing Afghanistan close to our borders. The Afghanistan which is not a source of terrorism or radicalism of any kind. So we can see what's going on in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, there are still terrorist groups like ISIL, and some Taliban movement representatives have fallen victims to the attacks, and the Taliban movement has been trying to get rid of these radical elements. And for Russia and China, it is very important to ensure stabilization, and to achieve this, we need to help it restore the economy, because there is another big problem, which is drug trafficking, and 90% of them go from Afghanistan. If terrorists have no money, how are they going to fund the activities? And the Taliban needs money as well. And Russia and China and other SCO member states should help Afghanistan, but the main responsibility is borne by those who have been there for 20 years. The most important thing that we can do now is to unblock the financial assets to let Afghanistan solve all the top-of-mind issues. There are projects that we can implement there. They're related to ensuring internal security, for example, and our special services maintain contacts with the corresponding Afghan structures. And within the SCO, it is important to start this work. And Tajikistan and Uzbekistan are Afghanistan's neighbors. And our military base is in Tajikistan, which was established on the basis of a Soviet Division 201. So bilaterally, we will continue to engage in this work with China and try to establish and build dialogue with the corresponding structures. And we will continue to do so within the SCO by investing money and creating conditions for our citizens feeling safely there, regardless of the developments in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Mikhail Pogrebinsky. Thank you, Fyodor. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to ask a question, the response to which I think is awaited by hundreds of thousands of people. You remember the Chinese proverb of how bad it is to live in the time of change. And Russia has been living in a time of change for the last 3 decades, and right now the situation is becoming increasingly difficult, what with the pandemic and the winter. Just, you know, recently Lloyd Austin, head of the Department of Defense of the US, brought millions worth in arms and weapons to Europe. And you don't need to be a NATO member to deploy the infrastructure of American or US infrastructure in Ukraine. I think this process has already started with the visit of Lloyd Austin to Ukraine and the transfer of weapons. You wrote in your article that the transformation of Ukraine into anti-Russia is unacceptable to millions of people, and that is corroborated by the polls, because more than 40% of people have a very good attitude, a good attitude towards Russia, But the transformation has already been triggered. Maybe a lot of headway has been done in that direction, which I think is a very dangerous way. And I think if this thing with NATO-related infrastructure continues to be implemented, then this process of turning of Ukraine into an anti-Russia, the process that is still shaky, would be consolidated and would be like that for many years to come. So if this process continues, this is going to present a serious threat to Russia.
Gas supplies the next day. You have asked whether it is possible, and I can tell you that, yes, it is possible, but we should take a responsible approach to mutual obligations and work on that. By the way, we have spoken a lot about Nord Stream 2 and Gazprom. Actually, there are 5 European companies participating in the process. Why are we talking about Gazprom only? There are 5 big European companies working in this area, within this project, I mean. So it's not only in the interest of Gazprom, it's in the interest of our partners, especially European partners. So, Mr. Putin, about Nord Stream 2. Well, actually, it's your joint achievement with Angela Merkel. I'm not going to miss her. She's leaving. So it's not the decision that I have made. It's hers. She might have run for another term. She has been at the helm for 16 years. This is much, but Mr. Kohl was also ruling the country for many years. But as for Nord Stream 2, we have launched it together with Mr. Schroeder, and when we launched the Nord Stream 1 projects, the situation was the same. Like today with Nord Stream 2, but fortunately Germany and other European countries are receiving gas through Nord Stream 1 and much gas. So we have spoken a lot about green energy, about clean energy, and if there are some questions on that, I will try to come up with my ideas on that. So the carbon share is 3 times lower in our gas than in the American liquefied natural gas. So if our environmentalists are not biased, if they indeed care about the future of the humankind, they cannot but hear that. So they should insist not on closing down on the terminals that gather they get natural gas. And the same is true for Ukraine. Nord Stream 2 suggests modern technologies. There are pipes that allow high pressure. There are no emissions, and those compressor stations are like small factories running on gas, and they emit CO2. So they emit 5.6 times less than through the gas network of Ukraine, because it is very old, and environmentalists should have said that it should be closed down long ago. But they say the opposite. And the same is true for oil. It seems to me that I have spoken in detail on the gas problem. So since 2009 till 2016, the investment into oil production have stood at approximately $400 billion a year. And in the pre-pandemic period, they dropped by 40%, and now they total 260 billion. And you know, it's a cycle which goes from 15 to 30 years. Well, what are the problems that we have been facing right now? I have already said about different political aspects of them. You know, it's a very important thing that has come to my mind. The political cycles in the leading economies do not correspond to investment cycles, including in such crucial sphere as energy. The political cycle is 4 or 5 years, and what is being done by the leading political forces and parties and individuals, what are they doing? They make promises. There are different promises, there are lots of promises, and they promise lower prices for everything. And the same is true for the green economy. And what is the result? The banks stop providing loans for investment, and at some point of time, we will get to the point when, for example, today, OPEC Plus countries have been increasing production even more than we have agreed to do. But not all the countries can do that. Not all producers can do that. This is a process, a long-term process, because the cycle is big. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Fedor, Mr. President. It's good to see you again in Valdai and Sochi. My name is Raghida Dargham. I'm the founder and executive chairman of Beirut Institute. So I come to you, I come to Sochi from Lebanon, a very wounded country. I am sure, sir, that you are aware of the explosion that took place, the fourth largest at the port, the civilian port of Beirut. There has been an attempt to investigate what happened, the story itself. There was a Russian captain, there was a Georgian owner of the ship. There was a request to you, Mr. President, to share, the request came to you from the judiciary, when it's an independent body from the government, to share what you have from your satellite pictures to tell us, to help find the story, this horrible story that happened, that amounted to assassination of a city, of a capital. My first question, sir, are you willing to share now the information you have, the satellite information, and to lend cooperation to this investigation so that, you know, the values that you spoke about are implemented where it really matters? And secondly, your two allies, Hezbollah and Iran, have been resisting, and in fact, they have been demanding the dislodging of the, not a prosecutor, he's really the investigator, the judge who's investigating the case. They have issued an ultimatum, they have issued a warning, Hezbollah issued a warning, that if you do not, to both your friends of yours, the President, Michel Aoun, and to the Prime Minister, Mikhati, that if they do not dislodge this investigator, this judge, then the government will fall. Do you support such a position, particularly that this country is on the verge of a civil war, and with Mr. Nasrallah announcing that he will not back down, announcing at the same time that there's 100,000 fighters ready to launch? And so this is a civil war in the action, maybe right next door to a prize accomplishment of yours, Mr. Vladimir Putin, which is in Syria. I thank you.
Could you please not take back the mic? What war are you talking about?
Sorry, sir.
What war are you talking about?
Because you see, the armed people are on the streets already. There are, you do remember the civil war in Lebanon, and right now you have, Hezbollah is not the only armed group. I'm not claiming that. There are many groups armed. But right now the conflict is over this investigator. His name is Tariq al-Bitar. and insistence of Hezbollah that he needs to be dislodged, and in fact interfering with them with the very principle of the separation of powers. And that led to confrontations on the streets and a possibility of a civil war really happening, Mr. President. Do not dismiss that possibility. It's a very scary one, and I'm not sure at all it will be in the interest of the Russian policy, even for Syria, never mind for Lebanon. And we wish that you will pay attention to Lebanon, particularly after hearing you today emphasizing the issue of values.
First, as far as the explosion in the Beirut port goes, to be honest, when this tragedy transpired, well, I would like to express my condolences once again to the people of Lebanon. There were great losses, the damages are exorbitant, and I learned about that from the media. I know that there was some explosive materials many years ago. It was imported and it was unloaded in the port. And as far as I understand, there was this desire to sell that at a premium, but there were some market difficulties, internal controversies. I know there was this story, and this is where the strategy has come from. And if we can help with this investigation, I do not quite understand how the satellite images can help, and if we have them, but I promise you that I'll look into that, and if we have those images, if we can help the investigation, we will do that. But first I need to talk to my colleagues who might have this information. Now, as far as Iran, Hezbollah, and the situation in Lebanon, Hezbollah and many people have different attitudes towards this organization. I know that very well. Hezbollah is a serious political force in Lebanon itself, but without any doubt, always. And in the case of Lebanon, we always advocate using dialogue as a means to settle any dispute, any problem, and we try to do that. And we are in contact with almost all political forces in Lebanon, and we'll try to do that in future to achieve a settlement of the situation without any bloodshed, because no one is interested in bloodshed, especially given the fact that the situation in the Middle East has always been on the brink, on the verge of the recent years. So we'll do everything to convince all parties to the internal political process of the need that they need to remain within the bounds of common sense. Yes, please take the mic.
President Vladimir Putin, do you support the ultimatum given by Hezbollah that either the investigator Tariq Bitar is dislodged or there is a downfall of the government? Do you support that ultimatum?
Well, unfortunately, we cannot comment on the internal political processes that are happening in Lebanon, whether we support that or not. We simply cannot say that, whether we support the position of the opposing force, because if we express such support, that would mean siding with one of the opposing parties, and that would be counterproductive from the point of view of efficiency of our intermediary efforts in helping to achieve a reconciliation. So allow me to refrain from siding with anyone. What I need to say is that there needs to be a platform upon which an agreement can be reached without any shots fired, without any bloodshot, and we in Russia are interested in such a peaceful settlement. Yes, please. Stanislav Tkachenko. Thank you very much. Stanislav Tkachenko, St. Petersburg State University. I've got a question about energy. On October the 13th this year, Josep Borrell, head of the European External Action Service, publicly announced and sent an Arctic strategy to the European Commission. This is a strategic document of the European Union that treats a wide array of issues, in particular energy issues, I would like to point to two pillars. First, the European Union thinks that the mineral resources, oil, gas, coal in the Arctic have to remain in the subsoil of this region. And to achieve that, they would probably have to introduce some kind of a temporary moratorium. And the second issue goes hand in hand with that, because the European countries intend to come up with a series of financial instruments to make countries such as Russia and others that could sell energy resources from the Arctic to prevent them from selling those resources if the resources are produced in the Arctic. So that is my question, basically. I try to follow what's happening there in Europe, but, you know, I do not always have the time. I try to catch up, as they say. As far as the Arctic strategy is concerned, I can say that we have a strategy of our own, the strategy that stipulates our presence there. We are also taking an active part in the Arctic Council. Right now we are chairing it, and the Arctic Council is comprised of countries that are part of the European Union too. Another thing, I said that at Geneva during my meeting with President Biden, or during my meeting with his team, and I will say that again, we are willing to engage in an open cooperation with all interested parties, with all stakeholders in the Arctic, based on the principles of international law. There is a number of conventions on the territorial sea, as you're aware, on the law of the sea, the Convention of 1982. So we are guided by these internationally recognized documents that we have joined, and based on these instruments, we are willing to build our relations with the rest of the world, including the EU. But if there is someone who tries to circumvent these documents and thereby limit our sovereign right to dispose of our territory, and territorial sea is part of the territory of a sea bordering nation, then it's an encroachment on our rights. And the same goes for the exclusive economic zone that extends 400 miles. There are certain rules determined by international law, and we're fully in compliance with those requirements. And on another note, we've just spoken about Nord Stream 2. In compliance with the above-mentioned rules, we were supposed to get the necessary authorization from the seaboarding nations, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, even when we constructed the pipeline not in their territorial waters, but through their exclusive economic zone, because that meant complying with the norms of international law. We defer to international law, and all the Europeans required that we should act in line with these norms. What about them? Do they intend to be in compliance themselves? Do they want us to be in compliance, whereas they want to violate themselves? No, that won't go. If they want to limit their activities in energy, well, they have the right to try. Let them try. We see what's happening in the European energy market. If they continue to, in this vein, acting so categorically without any grounds,
history, culture, and then people will get attracted. And to you, Richard Sakwa.
You mentioned at the beginning of your speech the climate change issue, the floods, fires, not just in Russia but elsewhere. And as you know, at the end of this month, 31st of October, COP26 will be meeting in Glasgow. So I wanted to ask you three things in particular. first is how your own personal views of climate emergency have evolved, because this isn't the first time we've mentioned it at a Valdai Club, and of course your comments today have evolved and over time, and clearly the emergency has got worse. Second, the way in which Russia can take a lead in this COP discussions and other discussions. You've mentioned the Russia Energy Week last week, in which you announced that the goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, which I think was a huge change in development. But I wonder in other ways in which Russia could show leadership on the climate emergency. And the third thing is, many countries, the United States has talked about a Green New Deal, European Union, a Green Deal. I wonder how Russia can actually make the climate emergency not just a question of technocracy and policies, but a form of changing people's behavior to make the quality of life better in cities and in more sustainable and more balanced, and indeed using the experience of the pandemic about work-life balance and so on. So if you want to change the balance between work and life and the state and society in this better progressive way. Thank you.
So you've mentioned taking the leading role in that. We should strive to solve a most complicated task, and we have said that we intend to be carbon neutral country by 2060, and we have been trying to do that. And I have said that on numerous occasions, that our energy grid is cleaner than in other developed countries of the world. 86% of our energy mix includes nuclear energy, which does not emit CO2, then hydropower generation and alternatives, renewables. And in the United States, it's 77%. In Germany, it's 64%. In big Asian countries, it's even less. Isn't this leadership? We have already become leaders in that, but we understand that this is not enough, because we can see temperature rises here, which go faster than in other countries, and it is especially true for the northern part of our countries. It has very serious consequences, taking into account the fact that large parts of Russia are in the far north. We do think about that. And as for the quality of life of people, we have been trying to eliminate landfills, which do emit CO2 as well and lead to people suffering. And we are trying to tackle this as well. And we have a program for big industrial centers. Maybe we are not moving quite fast, but we have managed to implement the plans. We might have done that much earlier, but we didn't manage to do that due to 2008-2009 financial crisis. And there was an outcry from industrialists because many enterprises wouldn't be able to cope with the high pressure. But now we are implementing all the decisions that are part of our legislation. There are 12 big cities that emit the largest amount of CO2, and we should deal with their problems first, and we will continue to do so in relation to different spheres. So this is part of our national plans. It is our priority. And as for carbon neutrality, we should bear in mind that 45% of all the emissions are absorbed. And by the way, we will insist that our absorption capacities should be taken into account, including our seas and forests and ocean territories. This is an objective thing that should be taken into account. We have big plans in the utility sector and energy saving. So we have something to do here, and we will do that. So by and large, we should not act upon our plans autonomously. We should strive to achieve good results, and in a transparent and open way, we are ready to do that. I hope that the fight for solving environmental issues won't become a tool of political strife. It would undermine the trust to us of what we have been doing for the future of the humankind. And Mr. Putin, do we have a program when the carbon border adjustment tax will be introduced by the European Union? Well, you know, as for the decisions that are not transparent, they're not being made, and I have spoken to some EU leaders, and they do understand that the measures they have been taken are not transparent, they are not just, and they should be worked upon in the future. And hopefully it will be done in the dialogue with other partners, including Russia. Angela Stant, who has long been with us. Angela Stant, could you please put her on the screen? So please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Fyodor, and I'm sorry I'm only here virtually. Mr. President, I heard you talk about some ways in which the US and Russia are working together, and I want to ask you another question about Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Russia and the United States, they cooperated to defeat al-Qaeda and to remove the Taliban from power. 20 years later now, in the aftermath of the American withdrawal, do you believe that counter-terrorist cooperation between Russia and the United States is desirable? Is it possible? Do you think we would still share some of the same goals in vis-a-vis Afghanistan that we did 20 years ago?
I think that cooperation in the counterterrorism sphere between Russia and the United States is indeed both possible, desirable, and necessary. We have spoken about that on numerous occasions, and I'm sorry that you are not with us today. You have joined us online, but evidently it's a common threat, and it's not becoming less dangerous than 20 years ago, unfortunately. And moreover, it is expanding, and it has become global indeed. And only by joining hands we can fight this threat. I have already said that our special services have maintained contact. However, it seems to me that we can deepen the cooperation between them, but we are grateful to our American partners for the information that allowed us to prevent terrorist attacks in Russia. I can assure you that we will do everything we can and provide the necessary information to our American colleagues if it is of interest to them, if we have this information, and this is what we are all interested in. And as for Afghanistan, Mr. Putin, the Taliban, the de facto authorities of the country, have come to Moscow, have been discussing issues with our ministers. Are they going not to be recognized by Russia? Well, you know, we have maintained contact with them, and it's not about the Taliban itself. The decisions are made at the level of the United Nations organizations, and we expect Taliban that has controlled the situation in the country would behave and would take positive measures. And it seems to me that we approach this point, and hopefully the decisions will be made like before, when we put this movement on the list of terrorist organizations. It seems to me we have had a few questions from Asia. Mr. Simatemai from Japan is with us. Thank you. It's a great honor for me, though I didn't manage to come to Sochi. The remarks that you've made are very important to me, especially the words that you have said about antagonism, especially in the Asian countries. Together with Prime Minister Abe, you have tried to tackle the problem and sign a peace treaty. However, over the past 2 years, there were 2 prime ministers of Japan who met you. And what can you say about the future of Russia-Japan relations? Thank you.
Well, yeah, indeed. Internal political life in Japan is organized in such a way that changes in the political scene can happen very fast, but the interests of the Japanese people and the Russian people are the same, and these interests, they imply the need to regulate, to settle our relations to the full, in particular through concluding a peace treaty, and this is something we will seek, even though people change at the helm of Japan. You know, on October the 7th, I spoke to the new Prime Minister of Japan, as you are aware. I had a telephone conversation with him. He is very experienced. He knows the relations with Russia inside out because he was responsible for foreign affairs. He is also a close ally to former Prime Minister Abe. So I think from that point of view, I think we can expect a continuity of Japan's attitude towards building relations with Russia. Back under Prime Minister Abe, we had a whole mechanism for our joint work, joint cooperation. We had plans to propel Japanese-Russian relations to a whole new level. I do hope this work is going to be continued in the same vein. Dear friends, President Putin has been answering our questions for 2.5 hours so far. To streamline our work, I would like to organize a blitz session, very short questions, not just what Madam Dargam said. And we have very short questions right now. And Ryan Chilcott, please. Yeah, thank you, but not the machine gun. Well, that depends on how you're going to ask. The question about, yeah, we have that as well. The biggest foreign agent in Russia, the biggest dangerous, the pandemic that is still raging on, and Russia is one of the countries that has a low level of vaccination. So what is your attitude towards mandatory vaccination? How do you address this issue? I said on many occasions that our vaccination becomes mandatory should it make its way to the national calendar of vaccines. But vaccination against coronavirus has not been put on this national list. So in that sense, it's not mandatory. But as per the existing legislation, the regional authorities have the right to introduce mandatory vaccination in view of the pandemic at the recommendation of chief sanitary doctors with regard to specific categories of citizens, and this is what happens. But it's not about the mandatory nature. I do not support the mandatory nature of vaccination, and here's why. Any decision that is obtruded on you from the outside, you can circumvent it, you can bypass, you can buy the certificate. Maybe sometimes it happens differently if you get a European vaccine. But, you know, I heard it said on many occasions there are citizens from European countries who come to Russia to get a jab of Sputnik, and in Europe they buy a certificate that they've got vaccinated with Pfizer. And, you know, this is what European doctors say, because many still believe that Sputnik is more reliable and safer too. But, you know, I am not here for promoting Sputnik V. Any decisions imposed from outside can be bypassed very easily. You know, there are hundreds and thousands of people who think on drafting new laws, whereas millions of people think how to bypass those same laws. So what you need to do is not to impose this from outside. You've got to argue and persuade. You've got to show people that vaccination is better than having the disease. And this applies not just to Russia, but to other countries as well. There are just two scenarios for almost each and every person. You either contract the disease and suffer through it, or you get vaccinated, and you cannot get away from that. And you also need to increase greater trust among people for what the government is doing. You need to show concrete examples. You need to provide arguments. And I think I do hope we will succeed. Mr. Sajapur, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question relates to Afghanistan. How you see the American defeat and withdrawal from Afghanistan in a broader strategic sense? Would it change U.S. global positioning, and what would impact on the realignment of forces that you talked about? Thank you.
First, what I'd like to say is, of course, the President of the U.S. made the right call, the right decision to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. He must have understood. Maybe he didn't know how exactly it would play out, but he understood that he would be subject to criticism internally. And yet he made the call, he made the decision, and he assumed the responsibility for that. Yes, we understand that maybe this decision could have been done differently, implemented differently, and this decision has an effect on how the U.S. is treated, is perceived, especially countries that perceive the U.S. as an ally. I think the tide will time and everything will get back to its circuits. I do not think there's going to be drastic changes, drastic shifts. Maybe in the short term, it's going to have an impact on the U.S. relations with its allies. But the attractiveness of a country does not depend on that alone. There are many factors. There is the military, the political cloud, military cloud, and economic heft. Alexander Rar, please. Mr. President, when Chancellor Schröder and you spoke at the St. Petersburg German dialogue, you said that it was the best point in time in Russian-German relations over the last 100 years. Right now, the relations have soured. My question is as follows. Probably it's going to be Olaf Scholz that is going to be the new chancellor. Do you think you can resuscitate the relations? Maybe the St. Petersburg delegate list. You know, it's not only up to us. If the German side expresses interest, then we will intensify these ties. The St. Petersburg dialogue still exists. It didn't go anywhere. It's still held and organized. Of course, we could intensify mutual contacts between our societies, and these contacts can be more fruitful and productive too. We need to depoliticize everything, and I hope this is what's going to happen. The coalition in Germany is turning out to be quite complex. There are divergent political views espoused by the forces that might become part of this coalition. So we'll see how it's going to play out in practice, but we're willing to engage in dialogue. Whom else do I see? Anatol Lieven, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, for coming. Anatol Lieven from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. China and other countries have made a move to electric cars, a key part of their action against climate change. What are Russia's plans in this regard? Thank you.
Well, you know, I spoke on this subject on many occasions already. Yes, when the vehicles are moving in the city, they are one of the biggest polluters, the utilities, the cars, the industry. That's obvious. But globally, we should not forget where the power, the electricity itself comes from. Let us not try to mislead one another. E-vehicles are great, but atmospheric pollution, air pollution when power is generated, that's probably not that good. Coal-powered generation is widespread. Alexander just asked about Germany. You know, coal power generation of electricity there is twice as big as in Russia. I think it's 30 or 32% or so, whereas in Russia, coal is used just for 15% or so of the total of power generated. Yes, e-vehicles are good. And for such a country as Russia, which has big reservoirs of natural gas, I think, yes, we could also use gas as a motor fuel. We need to change the energy mix, greening it, based on the climate agenda, and then we will obtain the desirable result. And have you driven an electric car? Yeah, in Ogorova. There is a difference or no? Yeah, I drive the car. No, I almost feel no difference. These are good cars. My eyesight is not that good. Constant tells a tooling. Mr. President, I'm the deputy from the city which we find ourselves in right now, in the State Duma. Yeah, but you still had to say that. Yeah, I had to. I want to ask about history and about memory, too. At the very beginning of our meeting, there was a lot of talk about Homo Sovieticus, and we have spoken about Soviet countries, post-Soviet space. I would like to say that on October the 2nd, there's going to be the 300th anniversary of the Russian Empire, and we also celebrated the 800th anniversary of Prince Alexander Nevsky, and you inaugurated the monument. It created a huge impression on people. But why is everything that is related to the 300th anniversary of the empire, why everything is held in secrecy? Are we ashamed of that? I think we shouldn't do that, because there is this continuity from Russia to Russian Empire to Soviet Union to Russia. Even though there are divergences and controversies, still there is continuity, and that is why we addressed you on that subject, and we sent a letter. Maybe we're going to miss the 2nd of November, but still, if you could participate, that's going to be good. I agree with you. Historic continuity is great for us to understand the way forward. And if we we didn't do everything we could, I apologize. We will organize events. Yuri Sloskin. I have a question about history, too. You are at the helm of the Russian state for many years now, and you must have thought about your role in the Russian history. What do you think your major accomplishments are, and what are the biggest failures as the Russian leader? You know, I don't think about my role in history, because once you embark on that path, it's high time you quit. Because, you know, it becomes a barrier. It hinders thinking, God forbid this happens or this happens, what, you know, what will Mrs. Grundy say? And, you know, that's the end of it. You've got to quit and abandon. It's hard to tell, but this is something we have to strive for. Yeah, let's ask questions from the boxes 1, 2, 3, and then, yeah, the young person there in the back, raising the hand. Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. Dmitry Suslov, Higher School of Economics. In your remarks today, you said that the controversies, both national and international, have reached a level that in the past, such level of tensions degenerated into world wars. So far, we cannot see a world war, at least a hot one. Do you miss that? That's what I wanted to ask. We are probably not seeing such a world war because there is nuclear weapons to take into account. But do you mean to say, do you think that in principle such a war is impossible? And if it were impossible, as you know, as Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, then everything is possible. If there is no danger of a world war, then there is complete irresponsibility. Like of any heat, there is no barrier in the way of aggressive politics. But if there is this danger of a world war, isn't it worth for Russia as a nuclear superpower, as a country that has survived gravest wars that you've spoken about today, a country that realizes the value of peace, which is also one of universal human values, isn't it worth for Russia to be more vociferous about saying that peace protection, peace strengthening is also part of your agenda and something you pursue? You know, we have been saying many positive, important things, but there are many things our partners choose to ignore completely. So, you know, there's no point in simply speaking. We need to obtain the results we strive for. That's difficult. This is something we're going to work on.
So you have said something about nuclear weapons. You know, nuclear powers bear big responsibility, and you have said that it is senseless to speak about World War III, but there is still a threat of a full mutual extermination. We should bear that in mind. And this sector, please. Tatiana Kostoeva, French International Human Rights Court. The question that France is very interested in. There has been reports about Russia's PMCs working and functioning in Mali. Does the actions taken by PMCs counter the general actions taken by Russia? Yes, this is something that we have spoken with President Macron about. You've mentioned PMCs. Actually, they do not reflect the interests of Russia. If there are somewhere, it is not that they're taking actions there on behalf of Russia. This is something connected with energy production, with gemstones or gold extraction. If the actions run counter the measures taken by Russia, we will respond to that, obviously. Thank you. Mr. President, first, thank you for giving an opportunity to have a discussion on many issues with you. I have a question about the Caucasus region. The problems there have not been solved yet. a truce has been introduced, but there are countries and brotherly republics together with Russia have come up with a 3+3 format. But Iran, Azerbaijan and Russia has established a format including North-South corridor. And unfortunately, we have seen terrorists becoming active in the Caucasus, and Russia's role is very important here, and Armenia and other countries can step in as well. Do you think we should initiate establishing another format that will be more efficient and will take into account the interests of the republics of the Southern Caucasus region and the regional actors as well? Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to give credit to the political wisdom of the President of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister of Armenia. And despite the fact that events were very tragic, they managed to cope up with that and make a very good political decision. There have been some grievances and claims against the leaders of these countries. There are always people who are not satisfied with the results. But you can always tell these people, well, just try to do it better. And President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan managed to stop the bloodshed. There's nothing more important than preserving people's lives. But moreover, conditions for the long-term settlement in the region should be established. And these conditions are possible only if the both sides adopt these agreements and view them as long-term agreements and value the advantages of the reconciliation of a peaceful coexistence. The communications with Nakhchivan are very important for Azerbaijan, and the country is interested in unblocking communication lines. This is one of the most important tasks set by Armenia to establish effective communications with the region and to bring normal life back. And Armenia is interested in that indeed. She's interested in resetting relations with Turkey. And in both cases, this should result in achieving the most important goal, which is ensuring peaceful coexistence of the two countries and creating conditions for the development of both countries. Is it possible? Yes, it is, and we have done what we could to stop the bloodshed there, and our peacekeepers have been fulfilling their duties there, and almost 50,000 refugees have come back home, and by and large we've managed to retain the status quo in the conflict area. There are no hostilities there. Unfortunately, there are some incidents claiming people's lives, but we cannot imagine things to be different under these circumstances. And without Russia's participation, nothing can be done on the border. We actually need no one here. And it is quite simple. the map is in the general staff of the Russian army, which showed the border between the Soviet republics. And we should draw upon these documents, look into them, and discuss things that needed to be sorted out. We should reach compromises on that so that both sides would agree upon. We should find a multilateral format. We have a Minsk group, and we work within this format with our partners. But the most important thing is to ensure security of the countries and establish good neighborly relations between them. But so far we have managed to achieve this goal, but we should look into the future, look what will come to pass next. And the agreement envisages the peacekeeping contingents staying there, but this is not the most important thing. We should restore relations between the two countries. We should wrap it up, I think. Igor Istomin, MGIMO University. In your remarks, you have said that reforming of international organizations may be an item on the agenda. What can you say about the Council of Europe and the OSCE and Russia's participation in these organizations? By and large, if these organizations will work on implementing the objectives for which they were established in the first place, well, this will make sense. The Council of Europe is the European affair, and the same is true for the OSCE. But if they will continue to lecture the new states established on the former post-Soviet space, they can hardly continue to exist like that. And if Russia stops participating, stops becoming part of these organizations, it will lead us nowhere. No one likes being lectured. We should take a broader look at those issues, including humanitarian issues, if we speak about the Council of Europe, or the security issues in Europe by and large. So we are going to finish it here. Please, in the center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Arthur Javed, Director General, Pakistan House, Islamabad. Actually, with all due respect, of course, the counter-terror campaign is very important internationally, and it will continue. My question to you is, Mr. President, is about the ongoing negotiation or talks in Pakistan, Iran, Russia, China, and of course Pakistan facilitated this Doha process as well. In the wake of NATO failed completely on almost every misadventure they made, including Afghanistan. Of course, the mess is their responsibility. But if Taliban manages to prevent drug trade, secures territory against ISIS, and terminates all the infrastructure, what would be the reaction or response from Russia, China, and Pakistan? Of course, it's not about recognition only. It's, as you said very rightfully, that it is important to empower Taliban on the ground economically, so the continuity should avert any social chaos like doctors' salaries, or nurses, education, teachers, anything related to social and other factors and stresses. I think I would really appreciate if we could look also, if you could shed light on this one, that how important it is to again wrap the mess of NATO. But it is important for the region. That's why I think Russia and China should take the lead on this account as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, as far as this mess left by NATO is concerned, I suggest we shouldn't speak about that right now. Because I think everyone has already shed criticism on what the U.S. did, and President Biden, I have spoken on that. I think President Biden was right to make this decision when he decided to withdraw troops. But right now we've got to look into the future. You know, you said they are the ones to leave this mess, so they shouldn't absolve themselves of responsibility. And they have many instruments at their disposal to have an influence on what's happening in Afghanistan. They, and Europe in particular, have financial instruments, and they, shouldn't, have a snobbish look at this territory as our European colleagues sometimes do, because they share some part of the responsibility for what transpired there. We've got to join efforts and help the people of Afghanistan. And we have to understand that we should not repeat the mistakes of the past. We should not try to impose on the people of Afghanistan what the Soviet Union tried to do, nor what the U.S. tried to impose. I think the USSR had a better, a more balanced approach when it intervened in Afghanistan. And the regional powers, and Russia in particular, are interested in improving the situation, and Russia will do its part to make sure the situation normalizes. As we can see, Taliban is trying to fight extreme radicals whose terrorist aspirations leave no room for doubts. They try to fight ISIS in particular. We understand ISIS simply joined Taliban to achieve their short-term goals. Right now they're attacking Taliban themselves. And we also understand that inside Afghanistan, Taliban has to build bridges with all ethnic, religious groups, with all political organizations, social organizations. But we need to start with the ethnic component. Taliban mostly consists of Pashto groups, but there are also Tajiks, from 40 to 47%, according to different assessments. That is a very big number. Besides, there are Uzbeks, Kazaris, and other ethnic groups too. So if you look at it from this point of view, yes, we know that there are representatives of these groups in the government, but not in the first row of seat. And there are people who want to claim an active role in the new government system, and this balance has to be struck. We're not nudging them to do anything. We are just sharing with them a view from the outside. And we're in contact with everyone, with all the political forces that exist in Afghanistan, and we manage to foster quite stable relations with all of them. And we want there to be an acceptable compromise to be found. And we do not want issues that exist inside to be resolved with the force of arms. We want women's interests to be taken into account. Afghanistan needs to strive to be a modern state. And I believe that the role and significance of Pakistan in that sense is not inferior to those of China or Russia. That is why we are interested in developing cooperation with your country in particular in order to secure a joint result. Without a doubt, Russia's interest is to make sure that, in the end, Afghanistan exits from this never-ceasing civil war, and we want the people of this long-suffering nation to feel safe and secure within their national borders. We want the people of Afghanistan to have a chance to peace and prosperity, and we will do everything in our power to obtain this result. I believe, yes, Mr. President, thank you very much for this conversation. I will absolve you of the functions of the moderator because it's high time. Well, you know, I never laid a claim to your position, you know, in a preventative manner. I think we've had a very interesting discussion. We've covered almost all the subjects possible. A huge thank you. And throughout this discussion, I think we shouldn't haste to go to New York. I think next year Valdai Club is going to gather once again in Sochi. We hope that everything is going to be great. We'll see you in person, and we'll probably have a 5-hour discussion next time. Yes, thank you. You don't need to organize this concluding session in New York. You know, there's no irony to what I say. Many people interesting would be go to Afghanistan, to other countries. There is good grounds behind that, and in Europe too, to talk about the issues that Europe finds most relevant today. Well, we could talk about energy, climate issues. Why not? I know, yes, we hold events everywhere, and you could do that in New York too. Thank you. Are you laughing? You don't think that is important? I would like to thank you, colleagues. Indeed, for many years you've been coming to Russia, and you still demonstrate a great deal of interest in our country. That is a good opportunity for me, for my colleagues, because your humble servant speaks in this format. Our ministers come here as well. I know that our foreign minister spoke here. The mayor of Moscow, our capital, spoke here in the past. It gives us an opportunity to tell you what our view is of Russia's role in today's world, the direction we're moving in. I think this yields some very good practical results. You know, colleagues, you know, our vice prime minister has just got back from the U.S. and he says that I was surprised, he says, when I spoke to the administration, to the security advisor, and I felt, he said, that there was some deficit of information. Maybe the CIA, they don't trust the CIA or something, I don't know. But such platforms are in high demand because they give us an opportunity to have a frank discussion, to speak to one another, to feel one another, and the decision makers at different levels will take into